Uncleanliness threatens God's presence, so unclean and broken were removed from the holy. And I'm going to go somewhere with this, so don't think it may sound a little harsh, but we'll get there. So when we look at the book of Numbers, we find a command given to Moses and the nation how they're to keep sacred space free from the unclean. God comes to commands Moses to remove anyone from the camp who has skin conditions, who is sick, who's lost blood, has any type of discharges, or has even touched a dead body, right? So he gives these specific rules of like, these people can't be in the presence, they can't be anywhere near where my presence is. And this goes for not just men, but women as well. So it's like anybody who has these particular types of conditions, they're unclean or they're sick, they can't be in my presence. And the reason for this is found in Numbers chapter 5, verse 3. And it says this, you shall put out both male and female, putting them outside the camp, that they may not defile their camp in the midst of which I dwell. So Moses and the nation right away did exactly what God commanded. As soon as the command came out, they separated those who were sick and those who didn't fulfill the requirements of being pure. And now I need to be clear here, this isn't meant to be cruel in any way. It wasn't meant to be cruel. We need to remember that God's holy and uncleanliness cannot exist in his holy presence. And you might be asking, well, why is that? So Leviticus chapter 15 gives us the answer. Leviticus chapter 15 verse 31 says this, thus you shall keep the people of Israel separate from their uncleanliness, lest they die in their uncleanliness by defiling my tabernacle that is in their midst. So the reason they were separated is because death is the consequence for bringing anything that's unclean into God's dwelling place. Deuteronomy chapter 4 verses 24 states that God is a consuming fire. He will consume those that are unclean. So God's holiness is not flexible either. It's very much like a fire that destroys anything unclean or unholy. And remember that remember as well that this is not because God is an angry God. It's the nature of who he is, right? He is holy. He cannot have unholy in his presence. And so there are a few examples of this found in the Old Testament. One is found when Aaron's two sons offer what's called unauthorized fire or strange fire. They call it strange fire. In Leviticus chapter 10 verses 2-3 it says this, and fire came out from before the Lord and consumed them, and they died before the Lord. And then Moses said to Aaron, this is what the Lord has said, among those who are near me I will sanctify, and before all the people I will be glorified. And Aaron held his peace. Now this seems like an odd story, but God tells Moses and Aaron that if they are set apart to be on holy ground, then if they do not respect sacred space, death will be the result. And that's exactly what happened to Aaron's sons, is they were unauthorized to do a task in the holy presence, and it went against God's commands, and it resulted in death. So not only must the unclean be removed from the direct holiness of God in his presence, but his presence must also be respected and not taken casually. And another example is found in, this is a good sermon, isn't it? It sounds pretty heavy, doesn't it? We're going to get there, trust me. Another example is found in 2 Samuel chapter 6. David had 30,000 of his men were celebrating the return of the Ark of God before an oxen cart. So they had put the Ark of the Covenant on an oxen cart, and they were bringing it back to the city, and David's dancing and singing, and all his men were celebrating, and there's horns going off, and the tambourines going, and everything's fantastic. It's looking great. And when they came to the threshing floor of Nacon, Uzziah put his hand out on the ark of God and took hold of it, for the oxen stumbled, and the anger of the Lord was kindled against Uzziah. And God struck him down there because of his error, and he died beside the ark of God. Suddenly the cart just takes a stumble, and so, good guy Uzziah is like, hey man, whoa, he'll try to stop it from falling over. And God was angry with him because he reached out and touched the ark, because that's God's holy space. That's God's presence on earth. And so he touches it, and he wasn't supposed to. He was unauthorized, and he was ritually unclean to even touch the ark. And in fact, they had created poles to carry the ark because you weren't supposed to touch it. So in order to protect people from God's holiness, rules were put into place to prevent people from dying. Now, if we stop here, we may feel fear and distance from God, right? If I just stop the sermon right now, isn't that just a heavy sermon? It's like, whoa, you're saying God's presence is holy and it has rules and requirements, and like even if we're unclean, if we're broken, we can't even be in the presence of God because that will kill us. Man, it just seems like God's a distant God, and maybe fear may seep into us. Unclean people are kept outside the camp. Men were struck down for getting too close to God's presence. But the heart of God wasn't to keep broken people away from him forever. It was to make a safe way for them to come near to him. That's why the rules were set in place. Is that way there was a process to come to him. And so God did something incredibly merciful. He raises up a priesthood within the line of Aaron and Levi, a priest who could carry the people's uncleanliness into his presence in a way that doesn't destroy them. And so now if you're here sitting thinking like, man, God sounds terrifying. So stay with me, because what God does next reveals his heart. So number 3 is this. Oh, I didn't have the whole thing there. So number 3 is God provides a way back. So God doesn't leave his people outside of the camp forever. He doesn't do that. God establishes the priestly sacrificial system as a way for the unclean, broken people to come back into the camp where God is. Okay? This is a complex ritualistic system put in place with bulls and rams, unleavened bread, oil, and special garments and tools. And Aaron and his sons were washed, dressed with holy garments, and anointing oils poured over his head. And we find in Exodus chapter 29, verse 1, it says, "Now this is what you shall do to them. You shall do to them to consecrate them, that they may serve me as priests." All of this was done to set up the priesthood in the bloodline of Aaron that will last forever. Doing so will make a way for a set group of people who will have a direct, unique access to God's holiness in order to restore the broken people back to God. And out of that system, we have what's called the high priesthood, or the high priest, the order of the high priest. And Aaron was the first high priest who had access to the holiest place on earth, where the Ark of God was placed. And he was there. It was to bring about the sin offering. So Leviticus chapter 16 verse 3 says, "And by this way Aaron shall come to me into the holy place with a bull from the herd for a sin offering and a ram for the burnt offering." So God sets up the high priest to deal with the sin and the separation of the entire nation, right? So all the uncleanness and all the sin, all the terrible things, he sets this up so the high priest is to deal with all that once a year for the entire nation. His presence on the Day of the Atonement once a year, but then God doesn't just stop there. So he brings in the system. He also equips the priesthood to deal with the individual, the one person stuck outside the camp with a skin disease, or with an issue with blood, or with contamination of some kind, or illness or brokenness of any kind. God gives the priests a prescription on how to get that one person restored back to him. So if we look at Leviticus chapter 14, the priest will go out of the camp to see if the person has been healed naturally, or if God has intervened and healed them. Right? So they're outside the camp, and if God has intervened, they'll be healed. If natural occurrence takes place, then they're healed through natural or even medicine. And then if the person's healed, the priest will then start the process of restoring the person, involving sacrifice, washing, and removal of hair. A very lengthy process just to get back in the presence of God. Leviticus 14, 7 to 9 says, so the priest will go out, he'll sprinkle him 7 times. If his leprosy, his disease has been cured, then he'll be pronounced him clean after, and then he's to go and he's to go make a sacrifice, and then he's to wash his clothes, shave off all his hair, bathe himself in water, then he shall be clean. After that, he may come into the camp, but live outside the tent for 7 days. So when he's healed, he has to make a sacrifice. The priest has to say, okay, you're good to go. Now go wash yourself, go wash your clothes, go cut your hair off, do all these things like that. Then you can come back to the camp, but you can't go in your house yet. You got to stay outside your house for 7 days. And then on the 7th day, he shall shave off all his hair again, and his beard and his eyebrows, and he shall shave off all his hair, and then he shall wash his clothes and bathe again in water, and then he'll be clean. That is a big process if you were sick. Can you imagine if you had a cold? It's like, oh man, you were basically out for almost a month, and then you have to lose all your hair. Oh, yeah. So, here we are in the story. This is the Old Testament in a really, 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 really tiny nutshell of how the system worked. God's presence is holy, and holiness isn't flexible. Holiness isn't like, okay, well, I'll let you in because you're a good guy. It's like, no, holiness is holiness. If you're unclean, if you're sick, if you don't follow the rules, it will destroy you. The broken, the unclean, the sick, they were put outside the camp, not because God hated them, but because his holiness would consume them. And God, in his mercy, raises up priests to carry the people's brokenness into his presence through blood, through ritual, and through sacrifice. And then here's something we need to understand, and I'm going to close with this. So I know it's a bit shorter message here today, so worship team, if you want to get back up here, I want to close with this. If you were a leper outside the camp, you couldn't walk in to ask for healing. So just bear that in mind. If you wear glasses, you couldn't go into the temple region. You couldn't get close to the center where God is. Right? You had to wait. You had to wait for the priest to come out to you. So if you were sick, you were cast out of the presence of even the community. You were excommunicated essentially. You're put all the way out. And you had to wait until you were healed, until the priest came to you. And you had to wait for the inspection. You had to wait through sacrifices. You had to wait through washing and then shaving and then 7 days. Then you could come back in the camp. Then you had to wait outside your tent. You had to wait again. And then you had to wash. And then you had to clean your clothes. Then you had to shave your head. You had to wait and more sacrifices. And even then, the priest didn't even heal you. And out of all that, can you imagine that? Out of all this whole process, even the priest didn't heal you. So when it came to skin diseases, the priest didn't heal you. He could only confirm that what God has already done had already done the work. And if it was a national sin, the priest carried the blood into God's presence on the Day of Atonement, again through ritualistic processes. The system was real. It was God-given, right? So I'm not saying that this was a bad system. This was given by God. But it was heavy. Can you imagine living in a time like that? Can you imagine like today, like some of us that are sick today, that have illnesses? You know, if you have any type of brokenness in your body, you couldn't even be a part of the community. It's heavy. And the system wasn't the problem because God designed it, right? I want to highlight that. It wasn't the problem. God had designed this. But over time, what had happened is human corruption turned what was meant to be good into a barrier, meant to be a bridge back to God into a barrier. The priesthood was meant to carry broken people back to God, and it became a gatekeeping system that made access to God feel really impossible. And that was for the average person. You know, because so out of all of this, right, over time, the priestly system had just created this boundary, just the way we are as humans, we created this system, the structures that just we couldn't get access to God anymore properly. And this is why, if you remember, almost every message I talked about the importance of Isaiah 61. And this is the hinge. This is the hinge that's going to bring us from where we are today for this last 4 weeks into something so incredible. And I want to share this with you because God promises that everything will change, and it will through Isaiah 61. When Jesus stands up before everyone in the synagogue and he says that the Spirit of the Lord God is upon me, because the Lord has anointed me to bring good news to the poor. He has sent me to bind up the brokenhearted, to proclaim liberty to the captives, to the opening of the prison to those who are bound, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor, and the day of vengeance of our God, to comfort all who mourn, to grant to those who mourn in Zion, to give them beautiful headdress instead of ashes, and the oil of gladness instead of mourning, the garment of praise instead of a faint spirit, that they may be called oaks of righteousness, the planting of the Lord, that he may be glorified. Remember if those of you that were here, the story of the bitter waters that we talked about, when the nation of Israel had come in and there was these bitter waters, they couldn't drink from it. 3 days without water, they were going to face dehydration to the point of maybe even death. They come across this place and the water was so bitter that if they drank it, they would have died or even got seriously sick. Remember what God did? He didn't remove the bitterness. He transforms it. Isaiah 61 is the same pattern, only on a cosmic scale. God isn't saying, I will remove the broken people from my presence. This is what God's saying. I will send my anointed one into the brokenness, and his holiness will not destroy the broken. It will transform them. You catch that? I will send my anointed one into the brokenness, outside the camp. I will go to where you are sick. I will go to where you are broken, where you can't see because you have to wear glasses, where you got a head injury, or you've got a stomach problem. He said, I will come to you, and I will not destroy the broken. I will transform them. That's so amazing. That's the promise of Isaiah 61 because it's the hinge that brings the Old Testament into the New Testament when it comes to healing. The Anointed One didn't stand behind a curtain waiting for you to become clean so that you can approach him again. He walked out of the Holy of Holies and he came looking for you. And he's still looking for you today. Under the old system, the broken had to wait outside the camp for someone to come find them. They couldn't approach God on their own. And if you feel that way today, you're outside, you're waiting, you're unsure if anyone's coming, I want you to hold on to what Isaiah 61 says. Hold on to that. The Anointed One doesn't wait for you to come to get clean. He's not waiting for you to get your life right. He's not waiting for the antibiotics to kick in. He's not waiting for the surgery to take place. He's not waiting for these things. He comes looking for you where you are, even in your brokenness, wherever you are. And that's exactly where we're going to go next week. We're going to go see how Jesus picks up that scroll of Isaiah and he tells the attendant, get me Isaiah 61. And he rolls out the spot and he reads aloud in the synagogue and he says, today the scripture has been fulfilled in your hearing. That's what we're going to go to next week. And so this morning, there are people here that are sick. I know that you're sick. Maybe you're not just sick physically. Maybe there's other issues going on. Maybe it's relational problems. Maybe you're dealing with something in your life right now that you're not sure you're just not sure where to go. You feel like you're out of place. Feels like you're on the outside looking in. I'm going to open the altars this morning. I wasn't going to do it, but I'm going to open them this morning. I'm going to invite you to come up to get prayed for healing, because the healer is here. The priest doesn't need to go out to go see you and confirm what God has already done. God is here. He's within each of us that believe in him. And that healing, that holiness that's within him, the Yahweh Rapha, is here now, and he can restore you. So I invite you to come up this morning, those of you that are looking for healing, whatever way it is, whether your body's hurt, or if your relationships are hurting, or whatever the case is, I invite you to come up this morning. Or even if you feel like your sin is too heavy, and you're at that point where it's like, man, I've done some terrible things. It's like, no, God can restore you. So I invite you to come up this morning. So I'm gonna close in prayer when we're done, but I'm gonna our praise team is gonna sing. We're gonna sing one more song. So stand as we sing one more song, and I invite you, those who are broken and need healing this morning, to come forward.
Come out of sadness from wherever you've been.